Ow.
To start off this podcast, because we're putting out our intentions and our energy is a powerful thing, we want to start with a brief prayer asking for a hedge of protection around us. Dear Heavenly Father, surround us today with your unending love. Give us the ability to speak into the hearts and minds of the people listening today. You, God, are the one who knows what each listener needs to hear. Please allow us to shepherd that message to them as you see fit. As we move forward into this next year, we ask you, Jesus, to give us your grace, forgive our sins, and give us the discernment to follow your path for each of us and as an organization. You are the way, the truth, and the light. God, please place a hedge of protection around this podcast, around us as the hosts, and around all the listeners, that they, God, will not only feel your glory, but will be protected from the evil that is trying so very hard to win their hearts. And finally, help us to be strong in you, Lord, that we come to you with whatever is on our hearts and minds this day. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Hello, and welcome to the very last episode of 2021 for the Imagination and Save Our Children podcast. We're your hosts, Becky, Bridget, and Emma. Today, we thought it would be fun to get together like we do on occasion and talk about what 2021 has given us. Pause in our gratitude a bit and reminisce about our crazy year. Then we want to discuss what we think we'd like to do in 2022. We had some great topics written from some followers that we're going to ask each other and each have a chance to answer. So really a pretty fun, laid back episode. Hi, ladies. How are you?
Hey, girls. How's it going?
It's
Beautiful prayer,
going.
Becky. Thank you for opening with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what a year.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe it's already 2022.
I
I thought
can-
2020 flew by, and then this year I almost feel it's faster than 2020.
I do, except when you look back at like what's happened, you're like, holy crap, look at the amount of stuff that has happened to us. Because I was looking at my time hop the other day. It was like the 12th. And that was the first time that I had started and I was working with the Wake Up Phoenix group after Allie asked everybody to put everything out. And within a couple of weeks, that's when I met you guys. I got on a call with like the group of people that you guys were working with. So literally after all this time, it's only been a year.
I know. It seems longer.
It does. Now
Towards
that
the
we
end, it
talk
like
every
sped
day.
up.
Yeah. And now we talk so much that I'm like, where have you girls been all my life? There's no way that this has been such a short time period.
Right? 1 year, but it feels like a lifetime.
Oh my gosh. I know. And all the podcasts that we've done so far, it's even interesting looking back on that, because that feels to me in my mind, I'm like, oh, I've only been doing this for a few months and I just had a year. You guys are crawling up on a year here soon.
Mm-hmm. We said 40 episodes.
So you guys have what, 12 more? 12. That's crazy. How cool. Who would have thought when we started this? Remember, all of our minds were like, nobody's going to listen to this. People are going to hate us. We're going to be made fun of and trolled, but let's just do it anyways, even if one person hears it, and so many have heard it.
Yeah, we blame Emma because she made us do ours.
And honestly, though, for people who are listening that maybe haven't crossed over, if my listeners have not listened to Save Our Children and vice versa, we really did create both of them to complement each other. It wasn't something of let's be separate. It was, hey, we're not able to squeeze everything that we want to into one podcast. Why don't we have one podcast that focuses on storytelling and on the survivor story? Why don't we take that same survivor or a different one and offer the parental aspect to it? So really, they all go together.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because like even us listening to the Survivor series, there's times where we're like, oh, I wish we could ask this. And I know Emma was always wanting to touch on like the family aspect and like childhood, as we often turn back to childhood trauma and just the healing and the journey. So it was nice when she was like, hey, you guys are starting this. And she actually taught us how to do it because we didn't know what we were doing. But even then, like going into like, and we'll get into it later, but like our organization, like we always threw it out there, and sometimes we would joke about it. And then we were just like, I don't know if people would support it. And then here we are. Now it's official.
Well, you know what I love too? I love that instead of us complaining about something over and over and over again, like what we see a lot of people do, we might come to each other with something that's frustrating us. But ultimately, if you look at what we've done, we've taken all of our problems and we've manifested and created a solution to them through our actions. And I think that's really powerful for people to see, because I know we've talked about this before, but our job isn't podcasting. This is our side project that we're doing. We volunteer to do, we pay money every month to do it. And it's something that complements what we do all the time, which is work. You guys are parents. Becky, you're a wife. I mean, there's layers and layers to us, and we found ways to integrate this into our lives. And I think it's really powerful, because that's what a lot of people struggle with doing is, I have all these things that bother me about the world. I'm really stressed, but they manifest that internally, and it never turns into some type of a solution outside of them.
And I don't know that you necessarily need to be starting an organization or finding the two closest friends that you never knew you needed. Like, I don't know that is what needs to happen, but I constantly hear stuff where it's, I wish I could say this. I wish I could do what you're doing. And again, it doesn't have to be that you're posting all over the place. You don't need to be on your third Instagram page or whatever because you're shut down. It doesn't have to be like that at all. But you need to be in a place where if you're sitting in a room, now again, work is a little bit different. You got to kind of balance wherever you're going to say, but don't just sit there, because where we've gotten in this world is just this idea that I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to be the bigger person. We're not going to rock the boat. And now you don't have to be coming in with a fist punch at somebody and say, well, did you know this or whatever? But you certainly could be like, well, hey, I heard this in this situation. How would you respond to that? Or what do you think about that? You don't have to be coming at them rudely, but we've got to stop sitting back and saying, I'm just not going to rock the boat. Nope, this is how we've gotten in this position because too many Christians, and I'll call us out, too many Christians have said, we're going to take the high road. Jesus threw the tables in the temple. Like, let's get going. It doesn't mean you can't be angry and start saying some stuff.
Well, too, and just being comfortable within yourself and learning to set those boundaries, and the power of the word no really does go a long way. And honestly, I've been in so many situations where by the end of the conversation, it often ends up with human trafficking. No matter who I come in contact with, it often ends up with human trafficking, including when some random lady jumps in my car.
That was crazy.
But there's always weird stuff happening to all of us. And I think we've just learned to keep our faith and prayer as our number one. And thankfully we have each other. Super grateful for that, as well as like all of our listeners and the support we have, because it continues to grow bigger and the community definitely has spread out. So we're super grateful for that.
And honestly, I think that's been the biggest blessing about speaking out, because I don't know about you girls, but when I was starting to wake up to things and felt kind of my anxiety and my nervous system activating because I'm recognizing that my life isn't what I thought, it's very lonely internalizing that. It's very, very lonely. And when I started speaking out, it's also lonely sometimes when you get a barrage of people who attack you for what you say. But it makes it so worth it when you get that one private message from somebody, or that one comment from somebody, or that one email from somebody, or somebody reaching out that says, thank you for not making me feel alone. I feel the same way as you. And then you recognize in your mind, oh, wait, I'm not alone. And that's a really empowering feeling that I don't think people take into consideration when they're festering on, what do I do? What do I say? I'm too afraid to do anything. I'm too afraid to say anything. You know, it's like you said, Becky, your path might not be starting a podcast, but what's stopping from somebody from communicating with maybe their best friend or a family member that they're close with and just saying, hey, guess what I learned? Listen to this podcast. It doesn't even have to be something that you're saying. You could send an article, you could send a post, you could forward something, you could send a podcast, whatever it is. There's small ways that we can create a really big impact. And that's how our relationship started. We started in a little Signal chat together, talking secretly, you know, not really posting a ton online, but starting to, you know, and look where we are now. And that all started because we had the courage to speak out.
And that's funny because that was Bridget and I were talking about that, where I don't even know what month was it that we got pulled into somebody coming, the survivor coming to your house, Emma, and like legit, I don't even know where we ended up. Like, I still have a burner phone.
We legit met at a park for
like it was in the beginning of us all knowing each other. And Emma is going to have this survivor stop at her house in Vegas. And so she's all getting ready. Like, we're thinking we have a week or two and it's like tomorrow. And then Bridget and I were like, okay, so we can buy these things and send them there. Then Emma will be ready and we'll come up, and Bridget is on the phone, totally speaking in code. Like, it became what, Operation Fishbowl or something ridiculous. Like, we were so willing to help and there, and then it didn't end up working out. Thank God it did not end up working out, because it wasn't meant for us to be part of. It's still funny as hell. Like, it really is a funny story, but it's like, to think about how far that was in, like, what, February or March of last year, maybe April, like
earlier
of this year. I mean, earlier this year.
Yeah, maybe earlier. I don't know. I just know that was the most classic, because we were like talking about private jets and connections, and like, it was crazy. And we did not know how to talk code. Like, that was the hardest thing. We did not know how to talk code. Like, I would me either. I would catch myself like talking code, but then be like, okay, screw this, I'm just gonna say it. And then I'm like, but then my phone, I'm like, okay, am I being watched through my phone? We were at a super paranoid moment. And I think that was in the very beginning, and we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into when it came to the survivor world and like the tactics and everything used. Because then shortly after that, we had been getting hit with spiritual attacks. And
we were called witches right after that.
Yep. So we've been called a lot of stuff, but we've managed to make it through.
But that's what's so helpful. Like, I don't know if I could do this without you girls. You know, you guys were the ones that pushed me to start doing this too. And Bridget's been the magic connector that everywhere she goes, she magically manifests these amazing people who are like, where have you been? We need you. Like, I have a story to tell and you're willing to listen. And it's been really cool just seeing how this has all manifested through just us making contact with each other and figuring out that we all think the same, and then building a little community. And it shows, even we're just 3 people and we've had a tremendous impact just in one short year, not just to other people, but on the impact on ourselves, how we've grown as people. I'm a completely different person today than I was a couple years ago, you know, and that's because I have you girls here next to me, and you guys keep me going whenever I'm getting barraged with cult members who are threatening to take my life and sue me and whatever else. And you guys have kept my feet on the ground this whole time. And it's such an honor to get to work with you girls. Like, there's no way I could have done all this without you.
Same here.
Yeah, same with you, especially when even like the whole situation, and let's just touch on, like, as we've touched on it in previous episodes, but like, let's go into as far as what we deal with on a daily basis, how we try to tie everything we do, even though we do advocate work on the side and volunteer, we still tie it into our everyday life, and we make it a point to make time for it, no matter what we're doing, especially when the months are heavy. We don't post it publicly, but it's nice to know that the survivors, we've created that community where the survivors can trust us, and we're getting DMs and saying, hey, we want to be on your podcast, or hey, I need a prayer. And so having that level of trust with the survivors and us using our platforms and really like showing like that's truly who we are every day in real life, and we model that across all of our platforms, is making sure that everyone knows they're not alone and everyone has a story, every voice matters, and we're here to listen even if it's a prayer. So even just going off of like the daily, well, not daily, because, well, yeah, there's daily, like I'm sure someone's plotting and spiritual attacks, but even like Emma, the whole owl thing, like next thing you know, like I will still never forget that moment of like a week later of an owl being outside my house and like flying at me and my mom when we were just like walking up to it, trying to get a picture. I will never forget that moment. And like you guys like reshifted, and Becky has been great at sending us prayers and saying, this is what you need to go do like right now. So I'm super grateful for Becky, especially bringing us stronger into our faith and putting that level of protection and making sure me and Emma like, hey, she's kind of like our mom. Hey, she's our cool mom.
Gosh. No, you're so right. That day that my car got broken into, and I'm messaging you guys like I called the cops are coming. I'm stressed out. My dog's in my car, like whining. And Becky's like, say this prayer. And she just sends it to me. And I was like, just weeping. And I'm like, I'm so grateful she did that, because it just shifted. I was going into this fight or flight stage. And now I just feel so grateful that I'm safe. So grateful that like I am protected, and so grateful that I have somebody that loves me unconditionally, even though I feel like I'm a mess right now. You know,
Right.
The power of God is so strong.
And I will give credit to Laura for that prayer. She sent it to me a long time ago, and I put it in my favorites pictures or whatever. And it's one of those like, and it happens to your point, Bridget, it happens every once in a while where you just can feel the energy getting icky. And it's not like you start, and I'm not saying you walk around whistling and skipping down the street all the time. That's just not how the day goes. But there are times where you're like, everything is just not going right. Everything just feels sad and heavy. I don't know what's going on. And we've had this conversation before too, where as for me, as the like, I am the emotional head of this house. And if I am sad or unhappy, everybody becomes sad and unhappy. And that doesn't mean that I don't get to be that and I have to pretend to be happy or whatever. That's not what that means at all. But I can feel the energy in the house go down, and it's like, there's something icky here. And so I will literally walk around the house with the Bible, and I will pray over every single room, over the doorways. And it's really just a prayer of, God, protect the person who's in this room. Allow them to know who you are, put angels around them when they sleep, protect people who come in through this doorway, know that our family is of love, all of those sorts of things. And you can literally, well, I personally, but I'm a little nuts, feel the energy lighten in the house, because whatever's there goes away. Now, whatever you want to believe, whether you think evil's in the house or the bad spirit, whatever, we're in a spiritual war right now. And the closer you are to God, the harder you're going to get hit. Just is what it is. And so the more stuff that we see, for us, although it's scary and at the moment it's like, what in the hell is going on? That is just reiteration that we are on the right path and we are doing God's work, because it's scary and you have to take a moment and go, what the hell just happened? But then you look back on it. And again, if you know God is with you, and it's easier said than done. It's easy to be like, oh yeah, God's with you all the time, until you're in a situation and you're going, oh, what is happening? And so there's times where I've woken up at 2-3 in the morning from dreams where I feel like someone's trying to attack me, or there's things that are happening, and I have had to wake up and I've had to read that prayer just so I can go back to bed, because it really is in this prayer. And I don't know if we can post images, but we'll maybe see if we can post it out there. But it really is just an ask of God to remove all of the evil that is attacking you. And so I don't know. It's been super powerful for me, and I'm glad that I was able to send it over, because it's one of those, like, you can just feel the energy shift and you're like, nope, now's the time for that prayer, because hell no.
Yeah. Off of that, let's go into one of the questions from our listeners was, people often ask us how powerful us three are. And so going deeper into that question, if we can go around the circle to all of us, let's touch on things we do before and after podcast prep, and what we do to decompress after heavy podcasts, and what keeps us going in order to have our energy at a high level and to remain being in the light versus getting sucked back into the darker path, as like all of us right now. And I know for me, speaking for myself, is there's a lot coming to light, and it's super heavy, dark, depressing, suicidal energy. And it's so easy to get sucked back into that. And for us, I have to often step back and remind myself of, I'm not going deeper down. We've been down so many rabbit holes, but with so much information coming out, you have to use discernment. So right now there's just so much coming out, you can't even tell what's reality anymore. So for me, I've made sure to, especially going towards the new year, is not to jump back into the research just because we've done so much, and remind myself like we're way advanced into a different dimension versus trying to function in like the third dimension, which is where half of the world is stuck. So remembering to use discernment and saying, yeah, we know that information's there and we've been speaking about it, but also being mindful and patient that people are just now learning it. So kind of playing along in a respectful way to be like, yeah, okay, like, huh, I told you so, but I've had to remind myself to stop and do that, just because of all of the energy. And I know for me, before and after podcast prep wise, I would say definitely prayer. Most people don't know that we research every podcast we're doing. We research, so we're usually taking in videos, the interviews from their previous podcast or whatever content they have out, as well as like going through their full social media news articles, everything. So we're doing deep dives, and I have a podcast journal and then I have a regular journal. So I'll do that before and after in both journals, as well as prayer. And then some days, actually, we probably do it almost after every podcast, is we touch base with one another. And some days we're just like, you know what? And we just like, the other day we were on one, we had a good laugh, like we needed that. So that would be
you are ridiculous.
Yeah, that would be my answer to just remembering that, like, even for us, we can't pour into others if we're not 100%. So just stepping back and remembering to journal, pray, and divinely everything will happen.
Emma, you want to go?
Yeah, I can go. Well, like, I think, Bridget, you covered a lot of bases that I think are necessary to do this. And sometimes, unfortunately for us, and I shouldn't say unfortunately as if it's a bad thing in this case, but on the research side, some of these survivors don't have any content or don't have any things to research. So a lot of times we will do that whenever there is the availability, but other times we're facing going on screen live with somebody that we've never met, we've never researched, and then having to have a really hard conversation with a stranger on our end, and then knowing that we're a stranger to this person that has gone through so much. So there is a lot of things that we have to do to prep for that, because it's kind of scary on both ends in a way of, sacrificing your energy and finding, how do I protect that and still maintain a high frequency so I'm not being triggering to the other person. I think having good friends, you guys help me communicate. We talk about everything. So
On like 4 different platforms all day long.
yeah. So hearing how you guys talk to children, sharing articles, we're, as much as we research dark things, we're also sending each other stuff on better parenting, on how to make the world better, on manifesting things, on how to bring your vibration up, on herbs to take. So we're also trying to elevate each other consistently because we know that there's those ups and downs. So prayer has been very important. I always say a prayer, if not on screen at some point. I'm either saying it before we start recording or else I'm saying it with the survivor or person on the other end. And a lot of times that's consensual. I don't even have to ask. A lot of times the survivors are like, hey, can we either record with a prayer or do you care if I say one here real quick so we're protected? So I think that has been really important. And for us too, it's been nice to experience that part of it and bring God into what we do, since that's really what manifested all of this to begin with. I believe you ladies being in my life was a divine intervention through God. And I think that he put us together to do this mission work and knew that we'd be more powerful together. So being able to bring that foundation of what we believe brought us together into our podcasting is just awesome. But I always try to exercise on the days that I have a podcast. That way I'm getting some energy out and I feel stronger going into it. I drink a lot of tea that morning. I meditate if I can, either before or after, but at some point during those days, I just sit in quiet and become at peace with myself. That way I feel calmer and more accepting to what I'm about to jump into. I think compassion, like being vulnerable. There's times always that we're crying on screen, you know, and to not deny ourselves that, to just go into it and say, whatever is going to flow out of me, I'm going to accept it. I'm not going to be shamed by if I cry and then I have to put this out. I'm not going to be shamed if somebody else cries, and just understanding that I'm here to connect with them and I'm going to go into this as genuinely as possible. And then a lot of times after, it's that decompression of, oh my gosh, I just took all this in, especially if it's our first time listening to a story and we didn't have time to prep for what we might be getting into and we're hearing it all for the first time. That can be really heavy. So ending with prayer and meditation can also be a really amazing thing. For me, I love spending time with my doggy after, because his energy is always high frequency. So just being in his aura is really healing for me and reminds me to just stay present and that there's always something to smile about, you know, and that there's still positive things, even whenever the world's going crazy. You know, he has no idea of that. And that's a really beautiful mindset sometimes to be in whenever you're really heavy, to just say, okay, wait, let's remind ourselves that even though things feel heavy, what can I be grateful for right now? My dog isn't thinking about all the bad things that have happened to him and all the times that he's, you know, been bit or ran into something or thrown up. Like, he's just happy to be here with me, you know, and that's a good space to put ourselves in, I think, after experiencing this. And then talking to each other, you know, we'll go on our group chats after and just be like, gosh, I'm so heavy, you know, and we'll either have Becky saying prayers our way or we'll have Bridget making jokes about turtles.
You had to drop it in there, huh?
I had to drop it in. I knew it was coming.
So I think it's really healing too, having you girls there whenever I'm feeling down, even if it's just, I go in and complain sometimes. I'm just like, I'm so angry, or this is so frustrating. And you guys will either make me laugh or pray for me. And it's great. But I think, you know, the preparation, we really do fit in a lot of research. You know, we're reading a long book in like 4 days. We're reading it start to finish while we're driving kids to school and getting to work and in between meetings. And, you know, any spare minute while we're taking a shower, it's like any spare minute that we can get, we're trying to find information to help us prepare for this.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add on, well, I'd add a couple things. When you talk about doing a podcast, a lot of people just think like, oh, you're just going to get on a podcast and you're going to talk to people. And sometimes it's exactly what it is. This podcast is not going to be a draining podcast for us. It's fun. It's exciting. It is what it is. But there are times where we'll have some stacked up. We like to do it so we can get a couple in a week, so then we don't have to do one for a week. But that becomes a very heavy week. It is hard to be on point for an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever, because like you said, we don't want to insult the survivor. That's never our intention, is to say something insulting. We don't want to do that. We don't want to bring, again, we are Christian, but not everybody is. We don't want to bring that into it. So then you kind of have to go around that. Not that I'm ashamed or wouldn't talk about it, but I'm not there to insult anybody either or hurt what they want. So it's that heaviness that comes around, and not heavy and evil, but just heavy and hard. It's hard to do that. And we're blessed because, Emma, you take a lot of that for us, because, and there's a cute doggy in the background. You take a lot of that for us because we get to use your podcast as research. And so what you are like, hey, this person has nothing for me to go off of. We at least have you. And so we're like, oh, you told the story, and I remember when you said this. And Emma's podcast. So we're really blessed to be able to have that. But yeah, there's times where you're like, I have no idea where this is going to go. Or you talk to someone and it's like pulling teeth. There are some people that we talk to, survivors, truth tellers, whoever it is that we talk to, that there is no problem whatsoever. And you could go on for 4 hours and you actually have to rein them back in to answer your questions. Or you can ask a question and they'll be like, yes. Okay, well, now let's reiterate, like, and it's one of those, and that gets really hard to kind of, being the host is very difficult because you have to bring people back around. You want to be engaging enough that they're not just talking, but you also want them to have the time to tell their story. And so it's a balance that we all work on. That's probably the hardest thing for me, is the being on point for a while and then having to walk out and be mom and wife and employee and all that stuff, as if you didn't just hear the craziest story ever, or you weren't just talking to some of like the biggest names in this area. And you're like, what the hell universe did I just fall into? And so a lot of times I'll go out, and my family can hear me. I'm just in the front room, but a lot of times I'll go out and I'll be like, you'll never believe what we just talked about or whatever. And that's for me to be able to decompress. And again, I'm not out there telling anyone secrets or whatever, but it really is just like, you'll never believe this. And so that allows me to do it. My biggest thing, of course, prayer. We talked about that. I actually, every day when I wake up, I have an app on my phone. It's really just a Bible app, but I like it because it has a lot of different plans you can go in. So if you're anxious, here's a plan for you. If you're sad, here's a plan for you. If you're wanting a better marriage, here's a plan for you. If you want to be single better, here's like, whatever the situation is, here is what you can do. And so every morning I will go through and do a plan, sometimes 5 days, sometimes 20 days, whatever. That's the very first thing I do when I wake up, is something in that Bible app. The last thing I do before I go to bed is I read the devotional for the day. And I'm currently in the midst of reading the entire Bible. I have like 20 days. I'm finally in Revelations. We actually made it to Revelations before Revelations happened. We'll see. But so I do that. So that is a big part of my day, is the begin and end with some religious something. I don't open the Bible and just read. I actually don't understand it well enough to do that. So I have other people tell my story. The other big thing I have is I oftentimes will have essential oils going in my office. I have a diffuser. I have a diffuser out in the other part of the house. My boys use it. There's a lot of ones that if they're anxious, they'll ask me to put lavender on their wrists before they go to bed. We have different things like that. So we do a lot of that in our house. And then nature. And this makes me giggle because I am such an indoor girl. I was such an indoor girl. I still don't want to go camping. I could possibly go glamping, but I love just being out there. So we have, in the middle of the suburbs, there's a park that I always go to that just has running water. Now it's like reclaimed, gross, whatever water. You don't want to drink it, but it just is like a spring that runs. And I will sit out there for an hour or two and just be. And all the people walking by, and there's a lake, and you go sit by the lake and you just walk around. And it is I can get so many messages and knowledge. If you go with a problem and you just sit by water knows and has that frequency, and it will allow you to do that. And it's been funny because my older son's like, well, how do you know if God's talking to you? And I said, well, God sounds like you. It's just the answers to all your problems. So if you have a question and you're like, well, how am I going to do this? And you sit down and you're quiet and the message comes to you and it's whatever's in your head. Well, yeah, you could say it's just, I came up with that idea. No, they were telling you what you needed to do. And that's how the message came back. So if you're ever hearing, I probably wouldn't do that if I were you, or maybe you should try this, or that's usually the Holy Spirit or God or higher power or whatever you want to call it, talking to you and telling you this is the direction. It's just now up to you whether you want to follow that path. Because Bridget and I, we went out to visit a safe house, and nothing to that safe house. It was fantastic, but we went out there, we visited, it was great, well run. We both got in the car and we're driving home, and after about 5 minutes, we're both like, nah, no, I'm just getting the download that that's not a place we want to be, and we don't want it. And it's done. It was very interesting. And I think more people really need to start listening to their inner voice, because that'll tell you where to go, even if you want to ignore it, because evil will allow you still have the free will to do whatever you want. We just need to listen to the, I probably wouldn't do that if I were you message that we get.
Well, and going off of that really quick too, is we have to use discernment, especially right now, even though we're small, the community.
Because we're small.
Yeah, because we're small in the community, everyone is connected to one another somehow, some way. There's a connection. So we've managed to use our discernment and also then reflect back and not make a decision too quick. We've left it to divine timing, and we've left it to God, and we've prayed on it. And then we've sat back and said, let's just see what we're being shown, whether it's something we're not seeing at that moment, or if it's, hey, you could learn from this because we know the line of work and what your guys' goals that you're putting out there for yourselves, so you can take that knowledge and try to better it. Or it's, hey, go work with that person. But usually it's more, we'll get a message and we reflect on it together, and then we make sure that everything's in alignment with all three of us, because we're not just speaking for the survivors, we're also all together as one unit working together. So we make sure it models everything across the board of what we all stand for.
Yep.
And yes, we do have some disagreements here and there, but it's minor. It's like, hey, how do we want to start this podcast, or how do we want to end it, or little stuff, or time zones. Like,
Right.
yeah, time zones is not my thing. Arizona does not ever change time. So that's another thing too, is like, we're always working with different time zones, and we always put the survivors first. So sometimes you'll see prep being at like 4 or 5 in the morning. Sometimes I know Emma's up at like 3 in the morning, and because she again is taking her dog out or doing things that we do in our daily life, but we're just bumping that schedule up. So we make sure to accommodate to the survivor, because we know and we value everybody's time. And that's one thing that we've done great at, is just listening and making sure our time is we're not wasting anyone's time, and they're not wasting our time. So we've been very respectful of that as well.
And I think one of the things that I've really liked to be able to say, which is I don't mean this in a bragging way at all, but to be able to say, my friends and I have a podcast and we have an organization that helps survivors. And I've had a bunch of people say, oh, you do? I'm a survivor, or I know somebody who survived, or I would love to hear your podcast, or I didn't know that you did that. Can you send me the link, or whatever? Like, I'll be sitting at baseball games and talking to someone else, and someone will come in and be like, you have a podcast? Yeah. Like, you kind of like have to feel out, like, are you really one who should be listening to our podcast? Or is it one that I have a podcast here. Oh, and here's our website and stuff like that. And so being able to, it's not just like, yeah, we stand up and fight this because we post about it. no, legit, we talk to people all the time that are fighting this. And we're on messages with each other. We're on messages with folks who have safe houses. We're on messages with moms who've lost their kids. We're on messages. We have all over the place. And again, I don't say that to brag. I say it as a reflection of what we've done in this last year. We were excited when we got one survivor, and now we have our whole goal, our entire goal for standby survivors when we started and still is to expand the circle. And if that means that I can connect you with somebody else because I know that person, that's exactly what we're here for. And the size of our circle from 9 months ago is exponential.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because it's like Bridget was saying, we never go out and enforce things. We're not going out and saying, this is what we're going to do. And it's ego based and we're looking to get famous and we're trying to do this. Our whole time, this whole time that we've been communicating, our question has been, how do we better serve survivors? How do we make the world better? How do we help children? And things have been coming to us organically just because we ask those questions out loud. And then we say, God, help us with this answer. What are your thoughts? And how can we contribute? And if it's just a little or a big thing, and all these ideas, even the podcast idea for all of us, I don't feel like that idea actually came from any of us. I feel like that was a download, that something clicked, that it was like, oh, wait, this is an opportunity. This is a resource that we all have and that we can work around our schedule. And it makes sense for all three of us. And it's something that nobody else is doing. But that wasn't originally something that we thought of right away whenever we were all getting together. We didn't put together ideas for podcasts. We were just communicating as friends and saying, gosh, we feel so helpless. What do we do? Let's turn it to God. And then all of a sudden, all these ideas start coming whenever we put our focus into that and say, what is the answer? I'm not going to force it. I know it's going to come to me. And ever since we've had that download as far as what we should do, all of a sudden we put out that, hey, this is what we decided to do. And we're met sometimes with bullies and trolls and people that are saying, you guys are going to ruin your reputations and you guys are, conspiracy theorists.
I didn't have a reputation to begin with, please.
Like, I sell weed for a living. What like, okay. I care about what you think of me, but
right.
I think that's really powerful too, is just trusting that if you're aligned with a mission and you focus on aligning with that and you're not forcing things outside of it, that people will see your light and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm attracted to that. That person's speaking out. They're not paying people to do stuff. They're not asking for money for what they're doing. They're just doing this out of the kindness of their heart in their spare time, and they're manifesting it. And I think that's been something that we've done really well, is just coming up with problems and then really meditating on what is the answer, and not forcing it, but just saying, we're just going to put it in God's hands. And if we're meant to meet other survivors, we will, and we have. If we're meant to do this, we will, and we'll have it, and to just trust it. And all those answers have always come to us, and it's never felt forced.
No, but it's also not easy. Like, I don't want people to think that, oh, if I just sit in a corner and do nothing all day, God will tell me what to do. Because I think we have a lot of those people too, where it's the idea that, I always call it like the IKEA thing. God always gives you what's at IKEA. You have to build it. And so it really is. I hope IKEA doesn't sue me. It really is the idea. Yeah. IKEA. Peyton used to call it my Kia because he didn't understand he thought it was I instead of my. And so the idea that if I just do nothing, this will come to me. And it's like, no. We have to live in our truth. We have to make sure that we're eating right. We have to make sure that we're exercising, doing the right thing. We've got to connect with people. Like, I know Bridget does all of the herbs. Again, hydrate, making sure that we're doing. Do we have to go see a therapist? I go and see my therapist every quarter. My friend Laura does energy work on me and clears out all of my bad juju. And that's actually helped with my mother, which is a cool situation. DM me if you have questions on it, because it's crazy. We go to church, we pray, we meditate, we get out in nature. Like, we have to take care of ourselves, and that is not easy. And so that's what I want people really to understand. Like, it sounds easy on this side to be like, oh, well, we did this, and this, or even just living in your truth is not easy. Like, Emma, you don't barely talk to your family because you live in your truth all the time. And my family thinks I'm a nutbag, except now everything's starting to come out and they're like, wow, Becky wasn't so crazy. But now it's aggravating because you should have listened to me a year ago because I told you this was going to happen or whatever. And so I just want to reiterate that this is a lot of hard work to do. It costs money for us to do it. We have a website. We have our all of the podcast stuff that we have. Even the Zoom we record this on costs money. And I'm not saying that to be like, whoa, Becky, Bridget, and Emma, they have to spend money, but it takes an effort to do something. And if it's like Emma said before, if you're finding something that's missing, just start. It doesn't even have to cost you all that much money. You can literally record it on your iPhone or your phone and put it up for the lowest free amount that you want and just start a podcast. And you don't have to do a podcast. Like I said, you could be talking to friends, talking to coworkers. I had a group that I was in and we're all like-minded stuff, but I'm just Emma calls me savage. I don't know that I'm savage. I just am Becky. And I always
so savage. You might think she's like cute and innocent, but she drops some just blunt bombs. And I'm like, you are the most savage person out of all three of us. Like,
I've been working on my throat chakra. I'm hoping my thyroid issues go away. So we'll see. I've always been what you see, what you get. And I'll always just say whatever. But always makes me laugh. Yeah, always makes me laugh because people are like, that came out of you. And I'm like, that's just who I am. But like, I've been talking about that. And I had a coworker of mine who's going through a lot of stuff right now that she was able to stand up to her kids' doctors to stop something she didn't want and literally came back and she's like, I found my inner Becky. And it actually really made me uncomfortable because I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like that, this is just who I am. And so, but at the exact same time, it was, wow. Like just speaking my truth allows others to live in theirs. And so that was what was really cool by it.
Yeah. And just remembering too, to like invest in yourself and trust yourself, because if that's not shining through, and once you go, you don't need to start a podcast and say you don't have the funding to do all of that. I mean, by all means, like we do it collectively to make what we want to happen. And also because we're very conscious of how do I want to word that? We're conscious of who we work with for the time being, because we have a vision and we know that God will organically put everything in our path. So for us right now, no matter who we work with, some people might look back and say, oh, well, this person, that, or he said, she said, but for us, it's like, it's not our job to judge. And that's God's job. For us, when we started this, we said we want to give everybody a voice. Every voice matters. Everyone has a story. So for us, our job was just to listen because we knew what it felt like to be censored, and we weren't going to censor the next person. So for us, it was even if it's connecting people, that doesn't cost anything. And for us, it was never about the ego. It's never about the ego. It's how can we build the future generation and educate and work together and use everyone's connections to lift everyone up together. So that's what we've always been conscious of, and just being very mindful of that aspect as well.
And we get asked sometimes by people, which can be a little bit discouraging. We do, like Becky and Bridget have said, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes with this. And then we're met with people that say, how could make your guest prove that what they're saying is true? You know, and it's such a misunderstanding that people have about this work, is that that's our biggest message with abuse, is that it goes unnoticed for a reason. There's a reason why it's this invisible pandemic in the world. And it's because abusers are so good at hiding evidence that they're hiding it from everybody. And there's been a veil over the world for generations and generations, and probably thousands and thousands of years. And asking a survivor to do that is such it's
a slap in the face.
It is, because they're not given that opportunity, and whenever we first formed these podcasts, we knew that these conversations would be unconventional and hard. That was the point. I remember for me, and I'd love to hear kind of what your guys' aha moments were on podcasting, but I remember when I started, I just created a podcast. I always wanted one a couple years ago. I just had it, started it, got a YouTube channel up, didn't do anything with it, but knew that it was something I wanted to do because podcasting to me, it helped me in my own personal development. It was a free way that I could learn and have access to really amazing minds and people and information without having to pay for it. And I could listen to it in my car. I could listen to it anywhere, and it's right on my phone. And so I always knew that I wanted to start a podcast. I just didn't have a direction for it. And going back to asking God, what is it that we're supposed to do? And then looking at, well, what do you have in front of you that you can do, big or small? And recognizing that, wait, we have some tools in our toolbox that we can use. But the work that we didn't get into it to sit here and pick sides with people. We often get asked that too, between feuds that go on, people that like or dislike us, dislike somebody else. And we're put in the midst of a lot of chaos outside of what you see us go through on a podcast, that we have to figure out, how do we manage this so we're not choosing a side, that we're here as a vessel to give people a voice. That's it. We're not asking people for proof. We believe that it's our karma to do something that we feel in our heart is good, and to not question what comes to us. Again, we don't ask and beg survivors and people to come on. A lot of times they find us and they're asking us, hey, I heard of your podcast. Can I come on? So we're trusting, we're giving that trust. We believe in being innocent before being proven guilty. And we believe in letting people fall into that. If there's a survivor that a year down the road, we find out wasn't using integrity on our podcast and decided to just make up a story and lie, we did the right thing by giving them a voice and doing what we are doing and standing in our integrity and saying, we're here for you and you can use our platform to deliver information. We believe that if that person ends up not being who they are, that's on them. That's all on them. We don't, and that they'll prove that in the long run. We're here to prove who we are in the long run. And that's not demanding all this proof and evidence, but that's the whole problem with child abuse, is that, and victims and survivors, is that society demands that they prove it, but we're not asking the same from the abuser. And so when we get asked that, that's always our answer. And then whenever we get asked to choose sides between survivors or survivor groups, we always just say, look, we love all of you. We're here for all of you. We're not here to choose sides. We're not here to delegitimize anybody. You've dealt with that your entire life. We're here to give you a voice, to be here for you, to offer you a shoulder, unconditional love, ears that will listen to you. And that's it. That is our mission with this. We're not here to judge otherwise and to demand things that we know aren't, proof is not, it's very rare when a survivor has any proof. Usually that's the very 0.01% that actually make it into the courtroom and win. They'll have documentation of their innocence. Right. But if you listen to our podcast, you realize how corrupt everything is, and that there isn't a way, they could even go to court and still the evidence is completely overlooked or wrong, so I want to make that a point too, that's other energy that we take as people try to delegitimize us, just because our mission that we believe God is giving us is to not ask questions, to take what's put in front of us and to use that and to say, okay, you're here. Let's give you a voice. Let's give you a platform. And if you end up not staying true to your word, that's on you. But we're doing our job and we're standing in our integrity no matter what.
Exactly. And for me, I had no desire to be on a podcast. I had no plan in my life, ever in my whole life, thinking I was going to be in a podcast. But we kept having conversations, and there was just this void that was not there. That as a parent, if I was listening to your podcast, Emma, and I heard all of these horrible things that have happened to people, whether it was because of their own family or someone they knew or whatever, and I wouldn't know what to do. I would have no idea where to help my kids, where to help family. I would have them in my house all the time. They'd never be on technology, and they'd wear a bubble suit all the time because I'd be so scared of the world. And so it just kept coming back around, all right, Bridget, we're going to have to do something. We're both parents. How are we going to do this? And you kept saying, well, you guys should start a podcast. And I know we're not starting a podcast. We're not starting a podcast.
I was like,
then-
you're already speaking out.
You're gonna start
Yeah,
a
like-
podcast.
And then she's like, no, I'll show you how to do it. And even when you're showing us how to do it, I'm like, we're not starting a podcast. Like this,
You're gonna start a podcast.
like, what are we going to talk about? We have no idea what we're going to talk about. And now, like I said, we just rolled out episode 40. We've had survivors that have been also on your page. We've had other truth tellers that have been out. We've had people who are healing and energy. We've had the gamut of things, but the idea is, as a parent, grab onto the things that are out there for you and start learning. I think for me, the biggest aha in podcasting was the same people who had very different circumstances in their survivor world all say two things: unconditional love, and make sure that you are informing and educating your children. And those are the two things. If you do those two things and you do them well, and that does not mean that unconditional love means that you never mad at them. That's not what that means. But they know that no matter what they do, you will always be a soft place to land after you rip them a new asshole. That is what they need to hear, and that's what they need to know. And making sure that they're aware of the world that they have when they walk out your doors. Because if you don't teach them here, the world will teach them. And that's a problem.
Yeah. Going off of that, I would say my biggest aha moment was, and will forever till this day scar me, is definitely Frazzle Drip. And knowing that we did so much research before. And when me and Emma were doing stuff with an influencer in the beginning with Army of Love, it started with that. And then for whatever reason, God took us on a different path. And God took us on a different path, and we stayed connected to one another. We both admired each other and being vocal on social media. And Emma actually made me start speaking out more. And knowing that I wanted to work with her somehow. I didn't know how, but we were going to do something. And little did I know that we were going on a path of podcasting, and that was Emma.
The bestest friends ever.
Yeah. And then I would say, so that would be my biggest aha moment, and going to different protests and being involved in my community, and always volunteering and having that community. Once I saw Frazzle Drip, forever will scar me, and the nightmare.
Don't watch it if you haven't.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but that was the moment. And for whatever reason, even when I tried to shut it off, God was like, no, you're going to watch this to see how bad it really is. And then it went from that point of, who do I know? How can I connect everyone together and branch everyone to do something about it? So Emma and I started talking, and then she had already had her podcast going. So I think too, even going to protests and family being like, why are you out there? Because there was times where we had like a curfew, but we didn't, because there was a lot of exceptions. So family would be like, you're out there. And sometimes like the chalk walk or whatever, I would have my kid. So showing her the good and the bad, and seeing both sides, and be able to use discernment versus than what the news was saying, and knowing it was happening in our community, and being like, okay, let's go see this at face value, not what mainstream media is saying. So knowing that my thought of, no matter if I was out there by myself, of standing in that truth and giving somebody a voice, of, in the back of my mind, always had, well, what if it was me? What if it was my child? And what if it was my neighbor, my loved one? Maybe if it did happen to me, or if I did get hurt while out there, maybe somebody would then care. Maybe then my family or friends or someone would then care to acknowledge it and care to believe that it's actually happening. So that was always my moment. That was always my aha moment. And then listening to survivors say, when they're speaking out, we're trying to inform people and share our stories so this doesn't happen to the next generation. and your child or to you. So when I think of that, I often will always go back to Samantha Brown and my first connection with her in the UK, and just even us being in Sedona and doing the alley challenge and sitting in that nasty little cave in the forest in the cold weather. And it really reminded me of the hunting parties after seeing Frazzle Drip and all of that. And it, like, you'll see us break down on podcasts. None of them are scripted, and you'll see and get our raw emotions, but that's just who we are as people. And often remembering at the end of the day, everyone is human and we all bleed the same. So every human life is valuable. So that's my aha moment, is going back to that of just being a human and knowing that that's not that humanity. And right now, the crisis we're in, it's not okay. And you shouldn't have to prove that. And no one should have to suffer the way that those children are suffering. So when people try to put us in different groups or get us to pick sides or Democrat, Republican, for us at the end of the day, I always tie back to, I'm not on a side. I stand with the survivors, and I look at the big picture at the end of the day. When we're doing our podcast and everything that we're doing, or getting our messages of moms who are fighting for their children and fighting the corruption, I just often think of, I hold my kid tighter and I'm like, I could not imagine being that mother. What can we do? So even just us having a discussion the other day, what can we do for these moms after hearing the conversations we were put in? And it's just, our heart truly does break, and we cry, and we'll go to sleep crying. Sometimes we'll go sit by nature. And even last night, with everything manifesting and at the end of the year to a new year, there's a lot going on right now. So I've just sat by the water last night, and I was just like, I just chilled and was like, you know what? You're not thinking about anything, like just pray and put it out there. Then woke up this morning and I was like, oh my gosh, you guys will never believe what messages we got today. And so just remembering to be present and knowing that it's in God's hands. And at the end of the day, I will always go back to fighting for what's right. And that will always be the children. That's the bigger picture.
Okay, so I have a good question. Sorry, Emma, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's okay.
So going on that, because Bridget had our questions written out, we would be here all day if we answered all of them. I like this question mostly because I have kids, but I'm curious, Emma, what you think. What do you think the biggest challenge of the next generation is going to be?
Gosh, the sad thing is there's, a psychological warfare going on that we acknowledge for adults, but we're not thinking about even just how these last 2 years are going to affect small children, that their first experiences seeing people are with masks. They didn't have that same neurological adaptation that we all did, getting to experience emotions on people's faces, as a child, you learn unconsciously, especially that first 7 years. You're not understanding language the same way you do as an adult. You're watching the little micro expressions in somebody's face. You're watching their eyes. You're listening to the tone of a voice. You're paying attention to how fast paced somebody's moving around, or kind of how calm they feel. Babies and small children, and this even goes into, adolescent and young adults. So much before we're aged, 21 to 25, when our brains are fully developed, is unconscious. So I feel like the biggest challenge is going to be, kids might not recognize, and a lot of parents unfortunately don't recognize the attack on children as being traumatizing. They're just thinking, put a mask on, be around people with masks, listen to the news, stay alert. And even critical race theory in school, now making kids question the race that they were born.
Deal with.
Yeah. And you're proliferating, drag queens in school. There's a lot of inversions of what we're teaching and exemplifying to children that I think is going to be very hard to undo in the future without more parents like you being conscious of it. You both have had kids that have continued to go to school through this whole time. Becky, I know you're homeschooling now, but the first year of all of this, you had both kids still going to school, and Bridget, you still have a kid in school. So it's like, how do you expose them to that and say, hey, this is what's going on, but let me unpack that for you so you can understand it standing outside of it, like what's happening, and defend yourself against it. Knowledge is the defense against mind control. That's what Kathy O'Brien always says. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, is being able to educate parents and get them caught up to what you ladies know, and saying, okay, and now that all this damage is done, and maybe you were unconscious during it and didn't realize how it would impact your kids, how can you unpack all of that for them? That way, as they get older, they're not carrying all this trauma with them, and they become, awakened young adults and adults that can then pass that on to the next generation, and not pass on more fear and trauma and all the different messages that have been inverted and have affected them neurologically through these last couple years.
Yeah, I would say lucky for me, my kid goes to a very red-pilled school. And I would hate to be the teachers, because the kids often clap back, and they're very savage conspiracy theorists is what the world would like to call them. But I love the fact oftentimes too, like they get more work because they're like questioning the teacher. Like I remember one day we got an email saying, well, because the law says this, now the kid has to write a 5-paragraph essay or whatever and explain like the law of like, even though you're speeding over 5 miles, the officer technically can pull you over, but most are like, they won't ticket you. So like the kids arguing that, I was like, I kind of like that. Like they're not
Real life.
disrespectfully doing it, but they're using their voice and giving something to rebuttal with and have that conversation versus just, oh, this is what you're told, this is what to do. So lucky for me, like my kid goes to a very red-pilled school. But I would say what I think the next generation is going to face would be the loss of human connection, especially getting sucked into the whole metaverse and all of that aspect, the pedophilia agenda. There's so much confusion in the world. It's so sad. But if we can get the world to awaken quick enough and parents to actually parent and parents be held accountable, then, because I'm going to often throw it back to the parents. Yes, there's the law and there's teaching, but at the end of the day, it ties back to the parent being involved in your child's life and really seeing what they're doing on the phones and education of it all, and not just relying on that teacher or that doctor, really doing your own research and parenting, making yourself better as a parent to then make your kid a better person. So I'm going to go back to holding the parents accountable and discipline your children and teach them respect. Because right now, the loss of this generation, they're very disrespectful, but at the same time, there's an edge where I'm like, they're very savage and they give no fucks at all. And so you see a lot of the younger generation really stepping up and kind of checking the government and being like, no, like I'm going to do what I want. So that aspect, I think it's a blessing and a curse if it's done properly and the intent of it is done in the right way. I think that the future generation will be okay as long as we get everyone to awaken and really, because it's sad enough that the world's already hurting, but we need that human connection and that love back into, along with values, brought back into society for sure.
So you totally teed up my answer perfectly. I actually think the next generation is going to kick ass. I think they're going to be healthy. I think they're going to be mentally healthy. And I think they're going to be prepared for it. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to be, because like you said, it really is, we have a long way to go. However, I think people of our generation are really making sure that they are healthy, whether that's food, eating, exercise, mental health, emotional health, religious health, whatever it is. I think that everybody is starting to change and shift really at a microscopic level, but we're all starting to move in. And I'll even just start at church the church that I go to for this weekend. They have 7 Christmas services that are yesterday, today, and tomorrow. There are 1,100 children signed up between the kindergarten and 3rd grade for them to go in, which means that there are that many parents bringing their children to church, whether that means that they're first timers and they're going because their family goes or whatever. That is that many children we have the opportunity to touch with God and to touch with the message. So that, I think, is starting to happen. I think that parents like myself who were very, I'm not going to say traumatized in the way of a survivor, but emotionally traumatized as the way you grew up, and you were going to perpetuate. I was going to perpetuate the same way I grew up because that's the only way I knew how to parent my children. I have changed that way. Both of my children are much more loving, open, kind gentlemen than I would have ever expected them to be 5 years ago. I think that's happening around the world. I think because we tell them what's happening, like Bridget's daughter in her classes, I think they are becoming more savage, but very respectfully. I don't agree with what you're saying. Here's why. For us, we are going in and we're starting to explain, remember the Constitution? This is what that thing means. This is what it means to live in this world. They thought this, they did this. I think that there's a whole generation, not everybody, but the whole millennial generation, sorry, Bridget, that is very blind to what is happening. They want the metaverse. They want this pretend area. They want to do that. But parents like us are taking these kids out into the world and saying, look at the world around you. Look at the country we live in. Look at the mountains and look at the trees and look at the water. How amazing is it just to be here? That doesn't mean that pieces of the metaverse aren't going to come over here. Technology is always going to help us. It's also a huge hindrance. But the ability to look at it as a whole and then have them go out to their friends. I don't think we will ever live in a society where you don't talk about politics and religion ever again. I think that people are going to be comfortable getting out and talking about it. And why don't you believe that? Not rude. You don't have to be rude about it. Why don't you believe this? Why do you believe this? Let's have a conversation. We can agree to disagree, but you start understanding people. And so I'm going to take the probably overly positive route and think that the next generation is going to kick ass. And it's going to kick ass because there are people who are finally standing up in their truth. Not the baby boomers, not the millennials who have been tricked into this whole entire nonsense that's happening, but this group that's between the 35 and 50. Thank you. Just kidding.
You can add in there. You can give me some years.
Yeah. Well, Bridget's the exception. And there are definitely people out there, and I'm not trying to trivialize or make everybody into, if you're this, then you're this, because technically, depending on what you look at, I'm a millennial too. But the idea of we're not sheep anymore, and we're raising our children to not be sheep anymore. And the more, like, I don't remember, Emma, if you said it, that the more information we give them, the less likely they are to be brainwashed. And so my boys still watch all the same TV, but they'll be like, Mom, did you see that? Did you hear that? What's this? Where does that come from? And it's like, yep, that's what I need you, because it can't get you if you know about it. If you're blind to it, that's when it gets you. And so I'm going to put out the positive vibes that this next generation is going to be savage as hell. And we raised that.
I love it.
I love that too.
What would you guys say? What was your most fearful moment of 2021 and your biggest lesson of 2021?
Ooh. That's a good one.
I've had a lot of spiritual attacks that I've never had before. So learning about the universes and dimensions and God and where that falls I've had a lot of exploration into chakras and frequencies and prayer and how it all starts to interconnect. And the more you figure out where you are in this universe, the more things start to happen. And so I've not had an owl attack me, knock on wood. We don't know what's going to happen next, but I get a lot of them in the middle of my dreams. And so I'll have nights where, like, I'll have people trying to choke me, or I'll have people trying to do stuff to me. And again, is that really happening? Is it, because you can always brush that off as, oh, it was just a dream. Is it? I mean, again, the whole spiritual world and what's coming. So that's been, to me, because again, the more you raise your frequency, the more something's going to try and bring it down. And that's been the scariest thing for me. But I think the thing that I've known, I know we've talked God a lot in this, is the more I trust, the more I believe, the more I just let go,
Yep.
the more it works out, the more at peace I've become, the more I try to hold on, like again, with our jobs and what's happening. And the more angry I get at the world, the more news I consume about it, the more things that I listen to, the angrier I become. And the more and when I'm like, you know what, I can't do anything about it. It is what it is. And what the plan is for me is going to happen, whether I fight it or not. So let's just not fight it. And so that's been my biggest blessing and message this year.
I love that. I think there's two answers for the scariest thing for me that I guess I don't want to say just happened. One of them was an event, and you guys already talked about part of it. I had in a very short period of time, just very recently, two pretty big things that happened almost sequentially, one right after another. The first was that I had my car broken into, and I had 4 owls left in my seat.
So creepy.
And I was the only person in my entire community that I know of that was targeted. And I have a car in a garage. So it was either just extremely random and it was kids, or it was something, that was intended for me. And I look at everything, whether it's good or bad, as a way to learn something new. So I don't always look at something bad and just take what's bad. I think that was meant to happen to me for whatever reason. But at the same time, it was in that moment, that was something really scary that I experienced this year. I'm not used to being a target in any way, whether it's random or not, of crime, and I pay a lot to live in a community that helps prevent that with gates and garages. So to me, it was very triggering, especially after, everything that we deal with. It's like, I try in my regular life outside of podcasting to fill my cup with things that make me happy, whether that is just going to the dog park and like watching the sunset, or that's, being at home and knowing that I'm safe here, or talking with you girls, or whatever it is. Like, I try to find ways to keep myself in a good place energetically, physically, spiritually, all of that. And that felt very violating to me to have that, with all the precautions that I take, and the fact that I'm already putting myself out there as a target. And like, I already feel like my arms are out and I have people shooting arrows at me. It was just I felt like somebody was taking my head and slamming it into the ground. But I also think that those present really unique opportunities to become stronger and to say, hey, I wasn't in there. I'm protected. God kept me out of my car while that happened. And luckily the only damage was some damage to my vehicle and to some of the things that I had, and then finding owls, but it's like, those things can be very triggering whenever you're constantly indulging in trauma. So that was like one physical instance that was scary. But one other thing that I actually got warned that this might happen to me by a survivor whenever we first started doing this, but I didn't really experience it then. So I didn't understand it until it started building up. I find now when I go into public places, knowing what we know statistically, what I do unconsciously now, and I think it's good because I'm using discernment. I don't let it get me so riled up that like I can't function. But my mindset changes now. Whenever I'm in public, I'm saying who around me could be dangerous. Because statistically, I know in a group of about 30 people, there's probably at least one person there that's a Satanist and that belongs to a cult. And that's like at the bare minimum, there could be more than that. So my interactions with people, Bridget and we always talk about our funny single life. It makes it really different.
Happy I'm married.
It makes it really different meeting people. I noticed that I have to be very conscious of my thoughts and of being, my energy going into somewhere and my preparation and using discernment, or else I get bombarded with that negative energy and it starts to give me actual anxiety. And I've had survivors say that happens to me. And after listening to some of these stories, you might start to feel how we do secondarily, like there's such thing as secondary PTSD. So that to me, it gets scary sometimes. I do a lot of things alone and I'm not used to thinking that way. So now when I go somewhere and those thoughts come in my head and I'm thinking, is somebody around me dangerous? That to me, it's taken extra care and it's taken extra healing for me to do on the side that I wasn't anticipating having to do, to be able to function normally. And whenever I meet a guy, to, be able to open my arms to that experience and not just shut somebody out because I'm nervous. It's like you look at things a lot different when it comes to the people that you bring in and the people that you're around and the environments that you're in. And I never used to care about that. I never used to think about, do I need to be protected? I'd go everywhere by myself. I'd put myself in positions where I was around strangers. I'd go places alone, and I still have to do that. But I'm fighting constantly that nervousness of, am I safe? Am I protected? Especially knowing that I had that instance happen with my car. And then right after that, I interviewed Kaylee Shaber Gandy and had this barrage of, cult members coming after me, which was kind of scary. So it was like, there are a lot of things that you guys listening don't see that we're battling. And it's not always stuff that we have control over. It's not a switch that we can just flip or an easy fix. Like, I pray that the world becomes a little bit more discerning when they're looking at things and they're thinking critically too about who could possibly be a danger to my child, who in this school, knowing statistically that there's 40 teachers in this school, that leaves room to say maybe one or two of them are dangerous. And I want to empower my child to not, to understand what those signs are and to look out for their other classmates to make sure that the people around them don't become victimized, and those are real worries that I have, is just understanding those statistics now and being aware of that, and then having to emotionally navigate it without it throwing off my nervous system.
Well, it's interesting you said that. And I didn't mean to stop your answering, Bridget, but I was out the other day with two friends, and we were outside. It was late, so it was probably like 9:30, and we were standing out in the parking lot just finishing up our conversation. And a guy walked out from a restaurant and walked behind me and went behind the building. And I turned and I watched him, because I was like, I saw, or out of the corner of my eye, heard commotion coming out of the restaurant, not loud, but just enough that like draw my attention. And then I watched him, and he walked behind, and I actually physically turned my body so I could keep peripheral from behind the building, because I was like, no way in hell are you going to be coming out from behind that building and coming and getting us. Well, come to find out, a police car comes flying into the parking lot, goes into that restaurant, and is now looking for the guy that just walked past us. And so he comes in, and I said, oh yeah, he just walked over that way. And the two ladies I was with were like, I never saw him.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, and so not until you just said that did I realize, I wouldn't say I'm heightened to the point where I feel threatened or that I'm worried all the time, but I am absolutely aware of my surroundings most of the time. Like,
and you look at like children differently. A lot of these stories, I'm so shocked to learn the percentage of survivors we've had that were abused right in plain view. Mm-hmm. It wasn't hidden. It happened in a school. It happened in a home. It happened on the street. It happened in a restaurant. I mean, there's so many times that we've had disclosures of these things happening in plain view. And just like how those two ladies were just oblivious, the people around were just completely oblivious to it even happening, because they're not made to be conscious enough to be aware that this is something that could happen. So like, I'm always like that with kids too. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to make sure that everything around me stays, I don't want to say controlled, but that I have a bird's eye view, that I'm using peripheral vision more, and that's different. I never used to have that awareness to even think about that. It's just like, the world's fine. If I'm in a public space, like nothing bad's going to happen, and then you hear all these stories and it's like, wait a minute, the majority of this does happen somewhere where it's generally public. Even if it's just in a home, there's fathers that are abusing children while their wives sleeping in the next room.
Yep.
And that's so terrifying to think about. So it's like this heightened awareness almost of having to control your nervous system while being aware, but being able to function too, to where you're not going out in public and being this like nutcase,
Or afraid to leave.
Yeah.
I would have to say I agree with that. My most fearful moment would be, I would say, not really knowing what we were walking into when we first got into this, and the spiritual attacks was something new I had to learn, and how to learn how to pray against it as well as the hedge of protection. So that is one thing, as well as a week later after we all calmed Emma down about the owls and trying to be positive and take that outlook, then being like seeing an owl in my front yard and like
And
flying.
not a little one.
No, it was huge. And
Mhm.
like it flying down and attacking, like going at me and my mom, like direct shot. Like I'm glad my mom was out there when it happened, because half the time they probably think I'm crazy. So I'm glad my mom was out there with me when that happened. But I would say that still put fear in me, like, whoa, what the hell was that? And then like I went back out there versus, okay, so for me, I was like, you know what? I'm not running inside. My mom was screaming and ran inside. Me, I luckily had a flashlight and was like, you know what? We're chasing this owl down the street. Like, I'm going to see. But I couldn't find it. It went away, never came back. Haven't seen it since. But I was like, I'm going to shine my light. I'm going to go at it, even though it just scared the shit out of me. I'm going to go at it and I'm going to shine this flashlight and I'm going to be a light. I don't know what it was for.
Literally shine the light on it.
Yeah, I literally went and shined the light on it. And I was like, I don't know what this message is, but whatever is coming our way with the owls, like go away, like we're done with you. So that, I would say that would be my most fearful one. My biggest lesson would be definitely, oh, and letting go. So tying to my biggest lesson is just letting it go. And like I've had more discernment. I've always watched my surroundings, but I would say I've learned patience, which I have it to a certain extent. But when it comes to relationships and all of that, I'm like, trust and patience is not my thing. Just because I would say like the topics we talk about and being very outgoing and friendly, like that has oftentimes too got me into the point where I'm like, oh, I didn't try to lead that person on, but it just, because of being kind, it kind of that happened. So I would say with that is learning to just be patient and learning to trust and just like letting go and just being like, okay, whatever happens, happens. But at the same time, like being very cautious of my surroundings, and like even when I'm out, even more now, or like the topics we talk about, talking about porn and all, like relationships and child abuse, everything we talk about, it really does affect you on a whole nother level, especially I would say being single, because now I'm like, I try not to be paranoid, but I'm just more mindful of like, it's still in the back of my mind, knowing that the work that we do, it's just, I question a lot more. So I struggle with, and I'm still taking it into 2022, is learning patience and trust, just because relationships in general, I would say like cheating and lying and all of that has been one thing that I've always like, I don't trust people. So yeah. And Eva can agree. So
100% agree.
you may get a single chronicle love podcast from us and Becky.
Yeah, with Becky, the host, as
Becky's
the
the
old
host.
fairy lady who has to live vicariously through.
It'll be funny though.
It would be funny. Yeah, send in your questions. We'll start
Yeah.
that. That'll be 2022. All right, I know we have to wrap up. What are your guys' hopes for 2022 for yourself and for Standby Survivors?
Well, first of all, I think that's so exciting. That's another thing that I feel like God put in our path was we are asked often by people who don't understand or who have never had a conversation with a survivor, why you guys aren't legitimate because you're not working with a nonprofit. Why aren't you working with a nonprofit? And we genuinely wanted to do something like that. We're like, hey, we don't want to do the work of a business. Why don't we look for somebody to align with? I'm sure there has to be great people out there in this movement. And time after time again, we're doing research on all these nonprofits and saying they're only contributing to the problem. And there is no way that we will align with them, especially because we go back to survivors. We always say, if it's not verified by a survivor, we don't believe it. So we always go back to survivors and say, hey, have you heard of this organization? Have you heard of this? And they're always like, do not work with them. They're contributing, trafficking children, even if they don't know it. They're helping kids stay in the system, basically, or rescuing them and putting them back in, basically. And we could have a whole episode just on that. But establishing a business between us was something I don't think any of us were even considering or thinking like, oh, we have time for this also on top of everything else that we're doing. But I'm most excited for 2022 because now we have an official LLC between all of us, and it really solidifies all of our partnerships. I think until people understand that business model and we start putting that out, a lot of people still have the perception that we're working totally separate. They're not correlating that, like, hey, both of these podcasts, they're meant to be together. You're supposed to listen. If you listen to mine, you should absolutely go listen to theirs, and vice versa. Like, they're made to complement each other. They weren't made to be a separate project. We couldn't fit everything in one podcast, so we just decided to make two. Otherwise, we'd probably always do a 3-person podcast. It would just take us 5 hours to do an interview.
And no one would listen to it. So
yeah. So I think for us, we developed an LLC knowing that the nonprofit has so much red tape around it and so many boundaries that prevent, not always on purpose, but it prevents that organization from actually helping survivors. There's just so much red tape that you deal with the government and on a state level and national that really prevent actual progress moving forward. So we decided to do what we haven't seen other people do, which is to establish an LLC that takes some of that red tape off, a lot of it actually, and allows us to actually get our hands dirty, solving the problems that we've been the last year. Why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? Well, now we know what all of those things are that we think shouldn't be done. And so having this type of entity, I'm really excited to do the opposite of what we see and to actually have real change made and to have everything under one umbrella that's easier to understand that, hey, we are a business. We're backing ourselves. We don't need a nonprofit to be legitimate. And here's why we did this. Here's why we're doing this. And we're together as a team. And I'm so excited for that because there's nobody else in the world that I would rather do something like this with. And I know that would be something I would think about, and I probably wouldn't actually do without you two there with me. You know, I never would have thought that I would have been saying, hey, let's do an LLC, as if we don't have enough going on. But it's been a really awesome gift that came. It's like, hey, why don't we do it? Let's go ahead and do this ourselves, and let's reverse the negative things and do it the way that we want. And I know we don't fully know what that looks like. We have a lot of things that we talk about behind the scenes that we don't share with you guys on the podcast yet, just because they are things that we want to announce when they actually happen. But the ideas that we have come up with and some of the things that we have coming up, like, I am really, really excited to go into 2022 and really shine a light on us being a team and pulling that in so people see the bigger vision instead of maybe the confusion of, oh, they're friends online, but they're doing two totally different things.
Yep. Yeah. And I love that. And the idea, again, personally, I would love, and this is where I'm just kind of leaving the discernment and the plan up to God. I've been on the chopping block at work. I have no idea if I'm going to be losing my job because I refuse to get cocoa juice. And I've been praying that I do. I'm not going to leave. I don't want to leave because it's a well-paying job and I actually like my job. I mean, I don't like the company, but I like the job. And I'm hoping that at some point the Stand By Survivors organization becomes my place to work, that there is something, and I don't need to make the same amount of money, but that there's some income somewhere coming in, and that's not going to come from the government. That's not going to come from but that's going to come. There's the division between paying ourselves back for the organization that we have and what we do, and then also using that money to help survivors get out of situations, help safe houses that also are not nonprofit, people we've connected with that do it all on their own, helping those folks do it. And again, it's the idea between you can go out and you can stand up and you can speak your truth, or you can help the people that do. And so we're kind of in that world too, where, like we said, we pay for it all because we fully invest and believe in what we're doing. But we also know that at some point, and again, up to God's timing and plan and otherwise, there will be bigger things for us. And because it will be bigger, we will be able to do more stuff. And so my goal is that at some point we'll be able to step away from our jobs and do this as our career. And like my goal for both myself and my future and the company is that we build some educational piece to this. That's my background. I want to build materials and I want to look at stuff and I want to make sure that we have things out there for people who are just learning about this, people who we have resources out there for survivors and where they can go to help themselves, all that sort of stuff. That's my goal for me personally and for the company.
Love it.
We'll see.
I would say bouncing off of what Emma said first was knowing when we did the LLC. Another reason too was survivors often get attacked for donations or any of their projects. And some of them have left their careers, including Jeremy Indica, who left engineering and solely put his story out there and now creating content and everything. But survivors, what people don't know is a lot of that they're investing in themselves as well. So with us, when we wanted the LLC, it was like, if we have to take the first punch and if we have to team up with the survivors and say, we'll use our face and our platform to get attacked first, then so be it. But we wanted to also be able to work with the survivors that we've worked with and be in control of who and what organization we're giving money to, even though we do it privately and individually with different survivors all across the world. We do that, whether it's books or a safe house for the night, or however we contribute to whatever survivor it is at that time. We do it for the love of the survivor and knowing that we really do invest in everything and model everything that we say on our platforms. So I think too is just being in control of who we work with as far as where the money's going organization wise. We want it to go directly to the survivor and make sure it's actually funding their dreams and what they're wanting to do as well, because there's a lot that's going on offline right now with safe houses and different things and projects, whether it's movies or content, different things going on behind the scenes that we want to put funding to as well. And then also we go to and we get invited to the galas in different trafficking events where we've sat in there, and I sat in one and I was like, did they really just make this amount of money in this little 15-30 minute time span? And literally mind blown. Like, could you imagine if that went to whether it's supporting the survivor community and the safe houses and community that they want to build and the rehabilitation, and they really have the resources to, there's no treatment right now to help survivors with MK Ultra and satanic ritual abuse. So the levels that people are going to want to put that material out and help others, like that's what we want to be able to fund and help put money towards. So that would be another thing I would say that we're definitely excited for 2022, knowing that what's going on behind the scenes that we can't quite share yet. And also I would say just us all getting to do it together, but the communities that we're being brought into right now and the circles we're being brought into right now is like super mind-blowing. Even looking at our Telegram, we were talking about it before the call when it was just us, and now we have like over 1,500 followers, and we're like, wait, what? So knowing that people are listening and knowing that it's growing and we still are small, we love being able to have that our arms around our business and what we model on a daily basis, and knowing that it's ours and we kind of get to do whatever we want, say whatever we want, and work with whoever we want, and not really be controlled or worried about the government funding, as we already battle censorship enough. So we're good on all of that energy. And we also appreciate like those people who do have platforms that are speaking out, whether it's music or podcasting or however their platform is, no matter how big or small. They're now, especially if they have a bigger platform, they're sharing our story or like the stories in our podcast, or now vetting us to get to the next level of that community. So super grateful for those with platforms who are doing that as well for us, as well as survivors, even connecting us with other survivors around the world. So definitely a lot to look forward to in 2022.
And say, here's to 2022, ladies. I wish
Yes,
I had champagne.
I know.
Really.
Water, hydrate
We have
shots.
water. Cheers, ladies.
Before we wrap up though, because I didn't send you guys this question on purpose.
Not
What
fair.
question? Which one?
I know.
Becky, you should be prepared for this. You put people on the spot with this one on our podcast.
Because I'm savage.
If you had the world's attention for 30 seconds, what would you say?
Oh, wow. How to fit it all into 30 seconds.
Right?
I think my biggest thing and the thing that I've learned the most this year is to stop with the ego. You've got to stop. You've got to figure out what's triggering you and why, because it's triggering you for a reason. So start healing yourself. If we don't start healing ourselves, we keep blaming everybody else. And if we keep blaming everybody else, this world's not going to get any better. And so whatever that takes going into nature, that takes prayer, that takes diet, that takes exercise, whatever that's going to take for you, talking to someone, medicine, whatever, we need to start doing that, because until we heal ourselves, we are going to be an angry world. And when we can heal ourselves, we will heal everybody else.
Gosh, that would probably be honestly an answer that I would say too, to tie that in. But I'm going to touch on something just a little bit different too, because I think it'll complement what you said. I also think, going back to taking your ego down, that I would love to encourage everybody to dig into any and all research that you possibly can. It doesn't mean you have to buy into all of it. There's such a fear that people have of deviating from the knowledge that we learned and having cognitive dissonance towards that. And that really is our ego getting in the way and saying, no, what I know is right. I'm not going to open myself up for anything else. That also is a process of healing in a different way. It's healing the psychological warfare that has been brought against us ever since we were young. And that too, whenever we undo that with ourselves and we open ourselves up to information, even if we don't understand it, even if we don't want to believe it, and even if it just plain out isn't true, that really is our defense against mind control, is having knowledge. And when that example gets passed down to our kids and our children are watching adults open themselves up and take their ego down and say, what if I'm not right? What if even 1% of this other story is right? Then we really start educating the world, and we start opening ourselves up for conversations and dialogue that we aren't typically indulging in. And I think that also is going to open up a lot of doors for healing for people, of getting those layers of the neurology that we've had really just instilled in our brain to start opening up and cracking, so we can see the world as it is instead of what we think it is. And then bestow that on our children, teach our children what we're learning. That way we're raising really strong, independent, critical thinking children also, who are also being healed because you're taking time to heal yourself.
Love it.
What's yours, Bridget?
Mine would be, I'm gonna go with my little blurb on my Beauty by Bee. Bear it all, be bold, be you, be your own kind of beautiful. Take your candle and go light your own world. And really just remember, at the end of the day, it's about the children. And remember the bigger picture, and just know that you're not alone. We're here if you need anything. And before we go into close, anyone else want to do wrap ups, thank yous, cheers to 2022?
Just honestly, thank you guys for an amazing year. Whether that's a full year that you guys have been following us or just a couple weeks, we couldn't do this without you. This podcast wouldn't exist without you guys. As much as we could be passionate about it, there could be absolutely nobody that listens to it because they don't care or find value. So I just want to take time to thank the people that are listening for helping us grow, helping share, help our algorithms however you can. And like Bridget said, for making it about the kids, for actually caring that these stories exist, even as crazy as they are, some of them, to be like, that's not real, that you're actually taking time to still listen to it, and that you're connecting with the survivors and supporting us, because we have every platform trying to deplatform us. We have to be so careful. And so we're not the type of material that's going to get boosted on a front page or a search engine on any of these platforms of, a featured podcast to follow. This is so organic, and we couldn't do this without all of you. So I just want to thank everybody listening for actually caring about these survivors, and for the 99% who don't ask for proof that what they're saying is true, who just listen with open ears, open heart, open eyes, open mind, and who take that information in and say, I want to go do something with this. And I'm so excited to see what people end up doing with all this information, and what more comes out in 2022 as other people start to get those downloads from universe or God or wherever it is that they're receiving that, and then helping us with the platform that we've established and other activists and survivors to help grow that to be even bigger than what it is right now.
And we'll be celebrating our birthdays, and Becky's coming too.
It's always good to celebrate.
Right? Well, thank you all for taking the time to reflect with us today in our 2021 year heading into 2022. Just a reminder, as we go into the new year, just remember to be present and spread love in your community. And just remember, human trafficking is a $150 billion global industry. When you sit and ask, when does it stop? When each and every single one of us have the courage to stop looking away and turning a blind eye. When you start to listen, when you start to stand by the survivors, when you start to hold people accountable, and when we can fathom that this level of evil exists, when you become uncomfortable, when you start to have these uncomfortable conversations at home, when you start listening, believing, protecting the children by taking a stand. Together, we must rise for the children. It starts with one person. It starts with you. When you say, am I part of the problem? When you face that mirror and start to hold people and family accountable. When you put down your smart devices and listen to your children and learn to be present, as you don't live in the world you think you do. Don't wait until it's at your door to give a fuck. Don't wait until it's someone you know. Don't wait until it's too late and suicide has been committed, in which now you wish you would have listened. It's time to be the generation to end human trafficking for the future generations and stop protecting the government, the influencers, the celebrities, as they sure don't give a fuck about you. So stop giving them your money and caring about materialistic stuff. It's never too late to do what's right. We also want to hold a space and take a moment of silence for those dealing with mental health, adversity in their life, those who are just waking up to this, those who were abused sexually, mentally, domestically, those who have had their innocence stolen by the corrupt systems, CPS, foster care, in your own family, a trusted figure, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a loved one, whoever it may be. You are strong. You are beautiful. You are enough. We're sorry for everything you've endured. You have a powerful voice, and we pray that one day God gives you strength. When you're ready to speak your truth, when you are ready to continue to shine your light and be true to who you are, never let anyone dim that light. Know we are here for you and you are not alone. Survivors. Actually, take a moment of silence. Survivors. As we know, this month and all major holidays are energetically a lot, especially during these times as the truth continues to come to light. Stand in your truth. You are courageous. You are a warrior. And together we will change this. It's time. Enough is enough. You are not alone. We hear you. We see you. We stand by you. Sending you love, light, prayers, and blessings. Love the Imagination and Save Our Children podcast. We will have a happy new year. Goodbye to 2021 and cheers to 2022.
Beautiful. Cheers to 2022.
Woo.
See you in 2022.
Thank